Please, remain seated with your arms, hands, feet, and legs inside the ride vehicle at all times.
The auction's coming up very soon, so I don't have a lot of time to screw around. We're just going to get down to brass tacks in this one. This video is going to be about steering, suspension, brakes, anything to do with the undercarriage of the car, tires, things like that. During the course of the time that Eric and I had this car, I kept receipts on everything. And when I say receipts on everything, I mean, a 3-ring binder, just receipts on everything. This binder does not represent all of the receipts. This represents the major and most important ones, anything that was probably over $100, anything to do with major repairs going to a shop or expensive. If I were to show you all of the receipts, there'd be about 10 of those binders, and the reason why is I have a single Excel spreadsheet that has tracked the entire repair history of the car during the time we had it. There are 465 line items on there. Now granted, a lot of those are purchasing items for the car, stuff for the roof rack, decals, trim pieces. I don't really consider that worth keeping as a receipt in this 3-ring binder here. Those are all interesting to know, knickknacks, but we're not really going to go into the purchasing of the seats for the back seat of the car that flip up and down. For honest-to-God repairs, it's still a pretty thick binder. At a later time, I'll make a little video about the history of us owning it, and while I'd love to tell you about that now, there is a short piece that absolutely has to be included for the purposes of this topic. Eric and I had always planned to have this car and spend a couple of years taking it apart, rotisserie it, welding on new metal, doing the job right, detail for detail. But Eric and I are not homeowners with a giant piece of land and a shop in the back. We live in California, and despite working in an engineering field and making good money working for a good company, we are apartment dwellers, and we're lucky to afford an apartment that we shared as roommates. Traditionally, roommates living in an apartment don't have a very good chance at restoring an old car. We are probably one of the very few exceptions that pulled that off, especially in a god-awful expensive land like the People's Republic of California. We did luck out, though. After 2 years of searching, we found a nice old man and his wife that were willing to rent out their house with this big RV pad on the side, and they permitted us to work on the car there, knowing that we would be doing that. It was a godsend. We moved the car in there, began to work, and then were notified a short while later they lost the house to the bank. We have 90 days to move out. It took us years to find that guy's house. 90 days to move out. Okay. So if at any point during the story you wonder, why didn't you do all the steering and suspension, replace it all at that time? We didn't really have the time. We had 90 days. I mean, we planned to put a paycheck into it every month. We didn't win the lottery. We didn't have a big boatload of money. There wasn't a safe filled with cash. We didn't have Scrooge McDuck's vault diving into it and pulling out a wad to fix the car, okay? Month to month, paycheck to paycheck, repairing it. Suddenly, we got 90 days to move out. Not fun. So, things like the suspension and related repairs were done over the years on an as-needed basis. In August of 2010, Eric took it in for an alignment and ended up having the steering box rebuilt. $1,000 later, money well spent, the car was finally aligned. Funny thing, even when you have the car aligned, don't expect it to drive straight. Not going to happen. Especially don't expect the steering wheel to be aligned. That is to say, even when the wheels are aligned and the travel on the car is proper, the steering wheel will never be directly centered. If you ask them to do that, they will unbolt it and put it back on for you and then tighten it up. But as you drive down the road 15 minutes later, it's out of whack. Why? In April of 2011, we got our first set of new tires. Now, the car came with the screen-accurate tires, which were 4-inch white wall ply tires. Although those are screen-accurate, it's a pretty horrifying experience when you're on a freeway in Burbank and all of a sudden one of those tires starts to disintegrate and you can hear the rubber flapping around and then a chunk flies off past your window and now you see sparks from the steel belt. Good times. Typical day in LA traffic, right? We had those replaced with 4 radial tires. Radials only come at a maximum white wall of 3.5 inches. Fine, whatever. Safety seemed a little more important than authenticity. Who wants to have a headstone that said at least it was authentic? From here on out, we always went with the radial 3.5 inch, and that's what you'll be finding on this car here. Around July of 2013, we also had the neutral safety switch replaced. Around December 2015, we got our next set of tires because even though it had only been 5 years and we hadn't put a lot of mileage on the car, the tires were wearing very unevenly. That probably had a lot to do with the fact that there was uneven weight distribution. On this particular car, and possibly all Ectomobiles, you're going to have more weight on the driver's side. Obviously, there's always a driver. Behind him will be computer equipment, all the stuff there, and then of course you'll have the rack of packs. Basically, it is a transport vehicle with all of the weight on one side. It wasn't enough to just replace the 4 tires. We took it into a suspension shop and had everything completely reworked. It wasn't until I'd even seen a picture of our car on Instagram, somebody had photographed us on the freeway going down the street, and you could tell by the back of the car it was leaning over. It looked like a ship in the water listing to one side, like it was flooding or something. The suspension shop built up the suspension and put in an extra couple of leaf springs on the driver's side. And basically, long story short, the whole car was redesigned to distribute the weight, anticipating the weight on the driver's side, and that was fantastic. We now could turn left and right, and both angles would, corner properly. You didn't have more turn on one than the other. We not only had that done, of course, new shocks. We have air shocks in the car too. At the very back of the car, underneath the gas cap flap, there's a little nozzle for the air shocks, so you can fill them back there too and adjust your ride accordingly. Now that we'd figured out why there was irregular tire wear on it and had the suspension fixed, we thought we'd be pretty good with our tires for a while. Keep in mind, even though we didn't do a lot of mileage with the car, probably 7,000 or 8,000 miles, it is Southern California. And even though we store it in a tent to keep it out of the sun, and even though we jack it up and put bottle jacks under the car in between every event to alleviate heavy weight on those wheels, they still dry out. There are times we would leave for an event and the valve stems had simply dried out and cracked, or the tires had split down the middle from merely heat. So the tires were replaced on this car 3 times during the 11 years we owned it. And it wasn't even because of high mileage. They were replaced with perfectly good tread and a split down the side. We knew we were going to need a spare tire. In the course of getting a spare tire, the tough part was finding a replacement wheel, and to this day we haven't. We had many that we purchased, many where the shop said, the book says it fits. Well, the book's a damn liar. The book says it fits. Then you get the wheel, and it fits the lug pattern, but it doesn't have the proper inset. I guess you could put it on the front of the car and have one of the tires sticking out a little funny, but you can't fit it in the back of the car within the wheel well. It just doesn't work like that. It would grind on the inside of the Cadillac wheel well. Commercial chassis need an entirely different inset for this. And we were never able to find one. In the 4 years I've looked for one, I just finally gave up. No parts place ever seemed to be able to cough it up. So we have a spare tire with an old radial on it, but can't even put it in the car. Also, fun fact, with some old 59 Cadillacs, the place to store the tire is behind the driver's side or passenger side seat. You hinge it forward and put it back there. Well, in our case, we'd built a store of equipment and parts, and we just didn't have the room to put the tire there. But we also knew, because Eric and I had owned a 1960 Cadillac before this, that some old hearses had a little compartment in the back where when you opened the back door, you'd see a little hatch and it would flip down. You could put the tire in there. So we always assumed that if we ever solved the problem of finding the proper wheel with the right inset, we would have a spare tire. And then I would cut a little opening in this particular car and put in a spare tire. But we never did find that wheel. I got a little frustrated. We didn't get a successful spare for this, and there is no place in the car to currently hold a spare, but that's where it would go. About that same time, around November 2016, we took the car in for some brake work with Harold's Automotive. Now, I've mentioned Harold in a previous video. Harold's been around since, I'm pretty sure him and Henry Ford went to high school together. Harold's been working on the 59 Cadillac since they came off the assembly line. He's got to be 135 by now. Comes to work every day. He's in better health than me, but that man knows cars. And while I have a little bit of contempt for the car guy or the book says it fits, I don't have any contempt for Harold. That man knows what he's doing. When I said I would like to put disc brakes in the front of the car, he said, no, absolutely not. What is the fascination that all these young people have? I'm going to modify my old car with disc brakes and it's going to be better. He told me, not on this case. You go ahead and modify that car with all the new stuff you want, but leave the brakes alone. And the reason why is the drum brakes work better. The disc brakes are made more for high performance in a car, but with a car like this, it is a truck. This thing drives like a U-Haul. Treat it like a U-Haul, not a Lamborghini. His recommendation was leave the drum brakes and put on heavy-duty truck shoes. By God, he was right. In July of 2018, we took the car in to have the rear axle completely rebuilt. Now, the fun thing that I'd known about this was many years prior to this, we talked to somebody at the Superior Coach Company. We asked him what kind of rear axle is on the car, because we've heard when they leave the Cadillac factory and go to a coach builder, you replace them. And he said that's true. Your car could have had any one of a variety of truck axles. We didn't keep record on it. It's whatever we could buy that week. Some would have a 57 Ford axle, others would have a 58 Chevy axle. It's whatever they could find and put on there. So this 59 Superior could have had any kind of axle back there. Well, they didn't have any specific records to tell us, but as we found out from RB Tire and Brake, wow, $1,900. RB Tire and Brake was able to rebuild our rear axle, and they did confirm that what's on this car is a Series 75 Cadillac rear axle. So you will be getting the correct axle that the Cadillac factory made and sold with this car when they sold it to Superior. Again, the caveat is, just because the book and a lot of car buffs tell you, of course a commercial chassis has a 75 rear axle on it. You don't know that it has a Series 75 rear axle. Some of these coach builders could have replaced it with something else that suited their needs better. We do have a Series 75 rear axle, and it was rebuilt just 3 years ago, so lucky you. And looking through my notes, part of that rebuild of the rear axle was the carrier bearing. That was also repaired, which is great because I'll tell you a story later in another episode, and it's not even my story. It belongs to Sean Bishop, but he was traveling in his car on the freeway when the carrier bearing broke, and the axle spun around like a fork in spaghetti and wrapped itself around all the brake cables and just yanked everything out. So no propulsion, no brake cables. Fun time, hell of a story, probably the scariest one of his life. I wasn't even there, and I'm scared of that happening. So I'm very grateful, and you as the next owner should be too, that the carrier bearing was replaced at the same time as this rear axle. In March of 2019, the gas tank was completely reconditioned, and while we were at it, we installed a second float. So you've got two sensors back there. And part of that is because even though we had the instrument cluster rebuilt, I never trusted that gas gauge. We would be doing some events, and we'd be driving home, and the gas tank would say, "You're half full." Suddenly, you're empty. It would just go from half full to empty, and you'd coast to the side of the road. I don't trust that gas gauge. So we had a second sensor installed and a second dial on the dash installed. And sometimes that one is accurate, other times it's not. So I think my best advice is look at both gas gauges and average them out. If one says you're half full and the other says you're a quarter full, you're probably 3/8 full. So average them out. But I'm grateful that we did have that gas tank reconditioned, because at that time we finally knew that we had a gas tank that was free of debris. 60 years old, there's God knows what kind of rust floating down there. You, the next owner, now get a gas tank that is completely free of all of that old rust. Also, during that same March 2019 appointment where we had the gas tank reconditioned, we got a new neutral safety switch. So that was replaced in July of 2013 and then again in March 2019. Doesn't seem like the sort of thing that, okay, whatever, it's new. It's even newer now. Yay. In April 2019, we went in for more tires. This was the last and most recent set of tires that are on the car. The shop that worked on the car did not understand that on 59 Cadillacs, the threads go clockwise on one side and counterclockwise on the other. So the grease monkey put his back into it and broke off not one, but two stud posts. You'd think that when you broke off the first one, back off and reevaluate it, but no, it's time to take out the air hammer and really go to work on that other one and show it who's boss. Since they did such a wonderful job breaking the bolts on the other side, I kind of realized, you know what? You, the next owner of this car, may not be going to a shop that knows and understands 59s have counterclockwise on one side and clockwise on the other. Let's make our lives a lot easier by just replacing all 20 of the lug studs and the lug nuts with a modern thread and a modern pattern. So what you're going to find in this car are not the authentic Cadillac studs, but you will be able to take it into any tire shop, and the 20-something kid that works on your car that has no idea about old cars will be able to put the air hammer to it and pop the lug nuts off using the direction he assumes they will be going. So maybe this is a benefit for you. They're newer, like every other car out there. They're going the same direction. Your tow guy's not going to have a hard time working on it. I kind of wished I'd done this sooner. There are times you don't want to keep the car authentic for the sake of being authentic and putting your nose in the air. There's times you just want to have the guy at the shop not break your damn studs off. But hey, am I angry? And the last thing we had done in regards to steering and the underbody and all that was we had a new steering pump installed in May of 2021. Eric and I were filming a video for one of these other videos that's here on my channel, and as he was revving the engine, we started to hear a squeak. And as we took it back to the tent, it was squeaking. All right, great, new steering pump. You know, the first time we had the steering pump replaced on this car was part of the original rebuild of the engine, and that was back in 2012. And that was only $87. This one came to $1,000. $1,000 for a new steering pump. Lucky you, the next owner of this car. That's $1,000 steering pump in there. So don't abuse it. Be gentle. Be good to it. Thanks. I was told early on, I should say I noticed in a lot of Hearst forums throughout the 2000s, a lot of guys would talk about where can I get a new steering wheel horn ring. And the price went up over the years, $100, $500. I think currently, the last time I looked at a Cadillac steering horn ring, they were going for $1,200 to $1,500 online. And the biggest lesson, the biggest walkaway is why? Why would you replace it? It's a highly breakable item. As soon as you get your precious coveted steering wheel ring so that you can wiggle the ring and honk the horn, it's going to break after the third honk. It's just a highly fragile, highly breakable item, not to be trusted. Why even bother? Is there some pride in having that authentic thing in there? This poor steering wheel has been disassembled and put together so many times. Well, one of the shops that worked on it back in, let's see, July of 2018, they didn't even bolt the thing on. I went driving away from the shop, made it all the way back to where we store the car, and as I was backing it in, the steering wheel just fell off. So don't expect the horn to work. The steering wheel will not be what honks the horn. If you want to honk the horn, use the big red button down there on the console. That's reliable, and it really doesn't hurt you while you're steering to just move your hand down from the wheel and tap that. I made it a giant red button for a reason. As the next owner of the car, you want to replace it? Yeah, go ahead, knock yourself out. We learned our lesson from countless others in online forums for hearses and cars like that. I'm not doing it. No. Well, that's about it for this episode that deals with steering, tires, and suspension. Did you like what you see? Would you like to support me by joining my Patreon? Well, I don't have one. I work for a living. I have a job. I don't beg for money. So no Patreon. I think my cat's got a Patreon though. I mean, if you want to throw money at my cat, that thing's just crazy for catnip. It's a habit. It's an addiction. Honestly, there's a support group that needs to be intervening here at some point. That's a different video.